Why, Suzanne, you sent two to me, because one says Dina and one says Dina.
I don't have anything on my screen but REI and a Dina Hayes without your picture. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Suzanne. You and I can hear each other, but we cannot hear Monica. And I can't start the video, and you're showing up as Dina too.
I don't know why.
She's talking, but we can't hear her.
So what should I do?
Oh, just wait a minute. I think she's trying to figure it out. We can't hear you. She probably sent an invite to you. I'm trying to think why we're both Dina.
I don't know. Mine is gone entirely. There's no thing from her.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you see me now?
Yeah.
I can't see you all.
We can't see
you.
It says that you stopped at, oh wait, hold on, let's see. All right, now Suzanne, see if you can open your video. Even though hers says Dina, Monica.
I don't know why, but she's there. Suzanne, I'm gonna put for you to allow you to rename yourself. I don't know why you're appearing as Dina.
Probably because I came on from her email.
Oh, okay. Can you go under and rename yourself?
How do I do that? And I will.
Try to click on the name.
Down here?
Click on, you're a panelist. So you see over in the panelist column to the right of your screen, there might be a column. If you look at participants, if you click on participants. Well, no, you're a panelist, so you might not see it in participants.
Okay, I have two Dina Hayes screens in participants.
So you're the blue one. You see that? So you see, so see if you can click on that.
That's the one that's not green. I don't have blue. Okay. Dina Hayes green, mute and cancel are my options.
Huh.
I don't know, do I have the power to rename her?
Yeah, because
okay, let's see. I don't see where I gave her the power to rename herself. It's not showing.
no, you can go and do that.
Yeah, except how do I do it? Because I don't see where that happens.
It should be over there in the little chat thing where you have invite more, those kind of things when you got the panelist. So my name, it says under me, it says edit profile picture. So it lets me, well, that can change my profile picture. It might be the way that you invited Suzanne as a participant. So there's a password, you are connected. Let's see, copy link. Huh.
Oh boy.
It's the way you.
I'm not Dina. It'll be pretty obvious who's white.
All right, that's a distinction, huh, Suzanne?
Yeah, it is.
Dean, are you there?
I'm here.
I don't see where that is any longer. So unfortunately.
Wanda, can you help Monica with the link for Suzanne? She can't hear.
Hello.
Hi.
See, Suzanne is Dina Hayes Green. Can you change that at all?
Dina, do you want me to make you host and then you could see what you could do there?
You can, or you can make Wanda host and she can figure it out.
Okay. So Wanda, now, well, if I make Wanda host, is that still gonna allow me to manage anything is the question.
I don't know.
Hold on, let me see if I can change Suzanne's name. I'm gonna just try. 1 second. Suzanne, try it now. I put rename under that. You are one to try to change your name. I put.
I don't have a clue how to do that.
Oh, never mind. I got it. I got it.
When I go to all the settings, it doesn't give me that option.
I think I'm going to be able to perform this one. It must be some miracle.
Okay, I'm glad.
You're becoming a pro,
There
Monica.
you go.
Oh, look at that.
Yay.
Hey, Monica.
Well, we are 3 minutes away from starting. I am sure that the participants who are already showing on my screen probably hear us because I didn't know how to silence so that they're not hearing our discussion. I see someone already said, hi, Dina. I don't know if you remember me, Natalie Menza. I don't know
Yeah,
where
I
from.
saw it. Uh-huh.
Okay, but so we're about 3, and we'll be going live on Facebook. I connected this to your Facebook, Dina, mine. I connected it to Crystal's and Gwen's and those that were open for me to do so, and Carvina's. So we have a number of live opportunities as well on Facebook. And let's see, we're just 2 minutes away and I will hit going live. We've already got one question here. My auto isn't on, is it? I don't know what that means. Answer live. I don't know what she means by that. So Hannah, I'm reading that question. Don't know what you mean. You'll have to give me a little bit more detail to respond to that. Hannah Ashley. Barbara's on and saying hi to everyone. Barbara Cheeves.
Nice, Bob.
Kathy Cranbill. And Kathy, thank you for confirming that you guys can hear us. I was a little bit worried about that. So that gives me a little bit of relief that we can be heard. Carrie Thatcher, Sheila Lee Carr, Jonathan Hackley. So thank you guys. It also confirms that we got Florida present. We've got folks coming in from different parts of the country. So that's great. We're about a minute away from actually going live and starting. Okay, that is actually my alarm telling me that we should begin. Let me make sure my phone is on silent. Just want to say good afternoon to everyone. Let me hit this live button, if you will. And for those of you that may not know, I am Monica Walker. I am one of the members and a co-founder of the Black Pearl Society. And because it would be rather lengthy to try and introduce you to the fullness of that organization in this moment, I'll invite you. I'll have someone to drop in the chat, Wanda will, our website, and you can go there and look on. But we are a group of African-American women in Greensboro, North Carolina. We're being very intentional in our leadership with regard to keeping race on the table, talking about race, addressing race, recognizing structural and institutional racism in our systems. We're very new, founded last year, and we have the explicit delight of being able to partner with the Racial Equity Institute in launching this series of conversations. For any of you that are familiar with the Racial Equity Institute, many of you are perhaps here and have signed on largely due to our partnership with you. We've tried to extend this network invite to everyone who has been a part of a racial equity training, anyone who is training inside of any of your cities, any of your communities, any of your institutions. We've invited you to be a part of this conversation. And I'd like to say that these conversations are strategically specific in that it is our very intent, and it is an unusual opportunity that we are engaging these conversations about what different groups are doing across the United States with regard to organizing, what people have been doing for decades in terms of organizing, what people are doing in this moment in terms of organizing, and particularly as we're being challenged by COVID-19, we think it is important for us to begin to think about what we've been doing and what it means to organize beyond this moment, what we need to be doing in terms of post-COVID-19. With that said, we have two very interesting guests who are joining us today, and I feel a certain special delight because they're colleagues, they're friends, they're people that I know very, very well. We have with us today Dina Hayes Green, who is one of the co-founders of the Racial Equity Institute. We have Suzanne Plihcik, who is the other co-founder of the Racial Equity Institute. And it is a special privilege to engage them in conversation about this work of addressing structural and institutional racism across the United States as this work has been being facilitated in various communities, various corporations, various structures in the US. And so what I want to do is to invite all of you, you as guests, as a part of this today. You've been muted, but I want to encourage you to drop your questions as they arise in our chat. We do have someone, Wanda LeGrand is with us and is going to be monitoring the questions that are being dropped in the chat. We will try to get to those for as much as we can. For those of you that have joined us on Facebook Live, we're going to ask you to drop whatever questions and commentaries you may have in the space that is provided for you there on Facebook. And with that said, I want to get into it. And so I'm going to start with you, Suzanne, and I'm going to start with you for a strategically specific reason. And that is that Dina, yet you've been how should I say, a resident of Greensboro for far longer than Dina, although both of you have been longtime residents of Greensboro, North Carolina. But what I also know about you is that you got engaged with this work of addressing structural and institutional racism. And rather than me talk about that, I'd like for you to introduce us to yourself, as well as to begin to talk about what brought you into this dynamic work of addressing structural and institutional racism. You're muted, Suzanne. You need to unmute yourself.
Well, it's been a lot of years ago when we had a project started as a result of a task force in Greensboro. It was back in 1993, actually. And that project was to do something about struggling and fragile neighborhoods. And fortunately, the chair people of that task force, it was a citywide task force, knew enough to say it's not people's fault that they have been put in positions of struggle. And from that, we created a project called Project Greensboro. From that, we created a project called the Partnership Project with Guilford College and the city of Greensboro and neighborhoods of color in Southeast Greensboro. In that time, we began to look at the impact of race. We didn't at that moment see it as our problem if we were white. But we did at least know that there was a great deal we did not know. And in our search for knowing, we came upon someone who introduced us to the training of the People's Institute. And I believe that that was indeed a game changer for our organization and for many people as we entered the notion that racism is in fact structural and institutional, that if you are white, you are complicit in those structures, not by will or intent, but by the very virtue of the fact that you benefit. And so in that learning, in that time of enormous learning, which is actually never stopped, I found that I won't say I found that this was what I was supposed to do. I found myself doing it. Let me put it that way. I've simply found myself doing it. And in that work, as I grew, it grew. And we've just had the greatest fortune in the world to have extraordinary leaders in this community and people with whom to work and to build the movement here.
Would you say a little bit about some of those people, Suzanne? Last week, you were, for those who weren't with us on last week, as we talked about health disparities, you mentioned that some of that engagement was initial around one of our illustrious ancestors, Nettie Code. Can you say a little bit more about kind of
Absolutely.
that?
Yes, Nettie's a great gift to this work, a great gift to all of us. And she was an organizer at the time that we started Project Greensboro, and was hired to do organizing, because, you know, that's what we do as organizations. We find someone who's already out organizing in communities of color and hire them. But we had quite an experience in hiring Nettie, in that she had her own mind and her own understanding, and it was extraordinary, and brought to us just a wealth of understanding about the role of race and the institutional, systemic nature of what was actually happening in our community. So yes, Nettie was very much a part of that beginning very early on, shortly after we formed Project Greensboro, and became the director of the Partnership Project, and was in fact directing the Partnership Project when the health initiative that we talked about last week began.
Suzanne, I want to cast this to Dina, but before I do it, I'd be a little bit remiss, simply because I know a little bit of that backdrop story. And I think for me, it creates a particular frame around you in terms of your understanding of race and racism. So Nettie didn't just become the director of the partnership. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, as we were learning what we didn't know, and learning that what we did know was wrong, and working to, what we used to say at that time, turn our organization right side up. As we did that, we felt that we must be led by people of color. We had not been. We had not been. We were very traditional in that startup, where there were certainly people of color represented during those times, but the leadership and the direction and the impetus for whatever we did was coming from white folks. And as we were learning how not to do that, one of the things we did was ask Nettie, and I say we, and I mean by that time a much larger group of people, to be our executive director, to be the head of the project.
So Dina, that segue makes sense because of what I know about how you entered this work of anti-racism, and that Nettie is factored figuratively in that. So can you introduce yourself by talking about how you segued into this work?
Yeah, so I'm Dina Hayes Green, one of the trainers and co-founders of the Racial Equity Institute, and I'll slip into my African-American vernacular English and say I was drugged into this work. And Nettie was one of the people that drugged me into it. I was serving at the time as a human relations commissioner for the city of Greensboro. One of the city council members, knew about my my relationship with other great community leaders, Irvin Brisbane and Nelson Johnson, and people who were, who have been addressing these injustices far longer than I have, and, appointed me as a human relations commissioner. And it was through that work that I met Diane Munden and other community leaders and Larry Morris, and they were just like, you need to go to this workshop. Well, I was an African-American studies major. I was a pretty outspoken person working with the History Club at North Carolina A&T State University and other, sort of organizations and groups. And so I just, was like, well, you got to be kidding me, and she was like, no, I really need you to go to this workshop. And I'm like, I'm doing the work. That's probably something that we need to get other people to do. And so Nettie, if anybody that knows Nettie Code knows that she believed in leadership development. and that she was relentless. And Nettie was not going to give up on me, and was not going, because I was in a position of weighing in on things, on the possibility of a police review board, substandard housing, just all of the things that the Human Relations Commissions weigh in on. And she was just like, you need some information that you don't have. And I was offended, but, just rationalized that by saying, Nettie was old school. She was an older elder. She was an elder. She was a, community leader. And, so I just left it at that, but Nettie didn't leave it at that. And finally I went to a workshop, and I tell this in the workshops often, that I went to get Nettie off my back. And you and Suzanne were my trainers. And remember, I came in with an attitude because I just was like, all right, what you gonna say that I don't know? And so then I'm crying a couple of hours later, right? Because I'm just like so overwhelmed, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And here I am, it was a life-changing, life-transforming experience that is just brings me to tears, because it is so transformative.
I have partnership then becomes a center point for both of you, a touch point. And what I'd like for you to do, if you will, either of you can decide who will take it first, but to talk about partnership, because my early days of having moved from New York, relocating here, getting involved in this work, partnership was the organization that was addressing structural and institutional racism. It was the go-to organization. Can you and Suzanne talk about some of the early initiatives? What were the things, after going through a training, what were the kinds of things that began to happen in this community?
Well, Suzanne knows. She was one of the co-founders of the Partnership Project. And then I came on as I was learning about this analysis and about organizing. And so I came on. So Suzanne, you want to say a little bit about how the Partnership Project, which is really the cornerstone of our organizing here, it is foundational to what we are doing today. And that's why I think it's just so important to say a little bit about the origins of that.
Well, we had, in Project Greensboro, which was the initial project, we had been invited to apply for a community problem-solving grant by Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation. Bill Rogers, who was the president of Guilford College at the time, was also president of that board. And we were working very closely with Guilford College because one of our founders, Barton Parks, was a professor there. So we were invited to do that, and it was a very small grant, but it was a grant that had 3 years of funding attached to it. You didn't have to reapply. If you got it, you were assured that those 3 years. And so we hired someone. We looked for someone to head the first partnership project, to be the person to take us into the next level of effectiveness in community organizing and anti-racism work. And we found a young man in Valdosta, Georgia. And I remember interviewing him on the telephone, and he asked me 2 things. He said, Suzanne, why are people poor? And why do you do this work? And something turned over inside me. I just knew that while I had party line answers to those questions, that I didn't have answers to those questions, and that he knew something that was going to be valuable to us. We did hire him, and he brought anti-racist training. Early on, it was through the People's Institute to us and to the Partnership Project. And the project itself started and was formed around those anti-racist principles. And it, smooth going, probably not, but important, and still going, which is even more amazing, I think.
We've got a lot of folks that are listening in today, and I know that one of the very pressing questions has always been, as we do this work across the country, is that people, the training is pretty persuasive, so we don't have to convince a whole lot of folks. but there is a lot of curiosity, and also people feel like, I believe it, I buy it, but I don't know what to do. So I really want to get down to some brass tacks of having you and Dina, Suzanne, talk about some of the things that the community began to take on. In fact, it segues into what would have been my next question, which is that literally it starts with partnership, but it eventually, the work now is very much, partnership is still very much alive, but so is the Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance now, which means that it has grown in terms of the engagement of people who are now, how should I say, moving into accountability. So can you guys talk about some of what that means, what that looks like, and what are some of the tangible things that people have done?
Dina, you want to go to Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance?
Yeah, I mean, the Partnership Project was, our training ground, and it's where, after the workshop, having a place to begin to deepen our analysis. The anti-racism or undoing racism framework is so powerful, and it is such a tool and a resource. You can't possibly grasp it in the 2 days that we're exposed to it in the workshop. And so the Partnership Project began to host the debrief sessions. It's where we would go after the workshop to continue talking about it. And you don't realize at the time how important it is to continue that learning. It's where we try to operationalize the concepts and learn those more. We figure out what we're going to do with it and what we're not going to do with it. And we learned a lot. We made some mistakes. We had some very, worthwhile things that we took on about that. But the Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance was something that grew out of the Partnership Project as a broader sort of community-based place for people to join, to say, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't want to forget this. I don't want to not do anything. And until I figure out what it is that I want to do, they would plug into that. And so Kristen Lavelle and some other sort of white colleagues and white organizers, put their, technical skills to use, and, helped us move from our sort of community, really grassroots, sort of organizing to the Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance. And we have two arms to that. We have the People of Color Caucus and a White Caucus. And we'll say more about what our sort of collective work is, and then what our sort of individual work as sort of these racial subgroups is about that. So
yeah, I was thinking, Dina,
taking on some very specific things like the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative, and that required so much of their time and attention. And they're the local organizing base for the workshops to continue. They get the community involved. They get our civic and philanthropic leaders to come to the workshop, building an environment where change can happen, building an environment where people who are going through the analysis are beginning to understand what people are saying when they're upset about the achievement gap or interactions with local law enforcement or these health disparities. We have now a lens to be able to at least understand a little bit about that.
Well, with that said, Dina, I was thinking, as you talked about the two caucuses in particular and the work jointly of both caucuses, Suzanne, would you talk about, in particular, one of the things that I know that the White Caucus here in Greensboro did was to begin to develop a series that really took you guys across the span of a few years, which was, you called it Doing Our Work, but essentially that was white people doing your work. So can you talk about what that looked like, what that was about, Suzanne?
Well, before we called it Doing Our Work, we called it Seeing White. And the idea was, how do we talk to white people about whiteness and what whiteness means? And the ways in which we participate in racist structures, even when it's not our intent, how we need to be able to see that so that we don't, in fact, do things that we would not consciously want to do. So the first series was called Seeing White, and we had a long series of different modules. I think they were about an hour. We allowed for about an hour and a half. One of our White Caucus members was a librarian, and in the hierarchy, actually, of our library system in Greensboro. And he volunteered our central library for this series, and we had a series, and we started out saying, you know, what is race, and doing a history of race and talking about whiteness. Then we went on to different topics like education, like healthcare. We had a whole series of topics, implicit bias, history, just lots of different things. And the first night we did it, we were in this tiny little room at the library, and our colleagues said to us, you know, we get maybe 15 people show up for events such as this, so we're going to give you room X. Well, very soon, room X was overflowing. And it overflowed to the point there was no way that we were in the halls, people were standing up, and he had to move us into the large room of the library. And we found that actually the case for the entire series, except for one event that coincided with several other events in our community. But we very quickly saw that people were interested in what this meant to white people. And while the group certainly wasn't confined to white people, and we had wonderful people of color who showed up and were a wonderful part of our discussions, it was primarily white, and it was white people looking at our whiteness and white culture and how that played out in the world. That became doing our work in the current caucus, and I can't claim any credit for what's going on in the current caucus, except for the baton has now passed to wonderful people like Jennifer Shaw and John Morrell, Claire and Larry Morse, and Jean Willoughby and Lizzie. It is a new form. We decided early on that after we did that for a couple of years, I don't remember now, I'll have to ask whether it was 2 or 3 years, but after we did that for a period of time, that we would offer the modules to anyone who asked for them. We would go out, take them to other people. And that's what has been going on as well.
So clearly, and Dina, I'm going to double back in a moment to talk about then the work of the People of Color Caucus. As a matter of fact, let me not double back. Let me now allow you. So we've got a white caucus over here doing the work of white people, but we've got a People of Color Caucus. Tell us about the nature of that work. I mean, you know, how do people of color as a caucus also gather and begin to look at whatever are the concerns that are uniquely out of who they are?
Yeah, it took us years to figure this out, years, because we were trying to figure out our identity. You know, are we a therapy group? Are we an action-oriented group? Are we, do we respond to things? Is this just where we come and, have dialogue? Do we read books together? It took a while to figure that out. It also took a while to understand the racial dynamics that are still present in us, even though we're people who want to be in this work together. And so, we saw so many examples of multiracial groups trying to come together. And, it seemed as though their work was calling each other out or spending time on who said the wrong thing the wrong way. And microaggressions or macroaggressions, none of those things are minimal. And so we decided early on that that wasn't going to be our work, that we believed that we would work through all the ways that race has shaped and shown up in our lives and the way it spills over into our, trying to come together. And that we'll work on that, and we'll have some principles that we live by, and they'll guide us through some of those things. As Suzanne said, taking leadership from people of color. And so our white caucus would do that. They would work on something. It's like, hey, this is what we would like to do. How do you guys feel about it? What kind of impact do you think it would have? And we would have those conversations. And we were really patient with each other because we have different ways of being in the world. As we talk about, we've been living in this race arrangement for 4 centuries. There is no way in the world that you haven't been shaped by race. And we've been shaped by it so profoundly in ways we don't even know. And then it spills over and it shows up. So we practice identifying that. The People's Institute, there's just so many brilliant scholars that have come before this. that have actually named those things. You know, the internalized racial oppression, this multi-generational process of taking in all of the things that racists said about who we are and acting out of that in implicit, subtle ways, and how it can be very disorganizing. And so the People of Color Caucus, I think we spend time talking about what is our work. You know, we don't put all of our eggs in, you know, outside of our own hands, you know, that our own empowerment, how do we begin to plan and envision what we want for ourselves and our community? And that is in no way exclusive, but it is an opportunity for us to begin thinking about what we want for ourselves in our future.
So then out of the experience, that's that we've localized the work of structural and institutional racism, but let's talk about this national platform. So out of the mentorship, as you say, of the People's Institute, you and Suzanne have co-founded the Racial Equity Institute. What is the work of the Racial Equity Institute? What does that mean? What are you doing? Because you have work when you're home here in this community, but what is the work of the Racial Equity Institute? What was the necessity of that?
Well, we, all of us, you, Suzanne, myself, so many people here, you know, had the, you know, wonderful opportunity of being exposed to a very powerful community-driven, community-designed undoing racism training. And, you know, again, it was just such a catalyst in getting involved in this work. One of the challenges that we faced often is, how do we translate that, you know, in all of the places that we're now working in? You know, we're inside of these systems and these institutions. We're not just the sort of community leaders, we are the institutional leaders. And so how do we translate that? So the Racial Equity Institute started as a sort of offshoot of the Undoing Racism workshop. And we wanted to, and it was also something that was influenced by Dismantling Racism, which was an organization started by Kenneth Jones and Tema Okun. And she's out of Durham. And so Dismantling Racism had an approach to this. And so we wanted to look at the best of what anti-racist curriculum and anti-racist education offered, and make some additions to those or some changes to those, and then to create a process and a content that we felt would be useful to us in the places where we were. And so that's how the Racial Equity Institute started in 2008 here in Greensboro.
Anything else you want to add to that, Suzanne?
No, I think that's the size of it. It's, I will add only that as we started out, one of our beloved friends, Kenneth Jones, had died. And a friend and colleague of mine, were finishing some of the contracts that he held in anti-racist work. She took a job soon after, and Dina helped me finish those contracts. And one of the amazing things that occurred was, it turned out we didn't finish those contracts. As we did them, people wanted us back, and they wanted us back again. And those contracts turned into more contracts. And the growth of this organization has just been miraculous. And I credit Dina for that. I think she has been the leader that was needed for this time and for this work, and was there to do.
So I've got a number of questions. I think I'll start with this one though. So now you got a national platform, and you've been moving across the United States from very large systems to medium systems to very, very small systems and communities in remote rural areas of this country, talking about structural and institutional racism. So I got a question that has two platforms is, I know that there are folks across the country that even with the training often feel overwhelmed and are like, what is the next thing? What do we do? How do we do? And so I want us to talk about, or you to talk about, what are some of those things. And then I want to simultaneously attach to that question that one of the centerpieces, now it seemingly has become a centerpiece of the work, is your groundwater approach, the whole notion that how that's moved across the country in terms of the articulation of that. So maybe you guys can split that and talk about what is the work after the training, or even in the midst of trainings, and then what is the work that is being framed by this groundwater approach.
Suzanne, you want to start and I'll pick up on the end?
Well, we had talked for a long time. One of the analogies that we used very early on in our work was the fish in the lake. And it was our way of showing how individual acts of meanness, as Peggy McIntosh would say, are not racism, but racism is invisible systems that confer dominance. And so to move people from the notion of racism as individual, to move people from the notion that racism is racial prejudice and bigotry, which are all very bad things, but to move people to understanding that there's a structural systemic racism that ensures that this is perpetuated. We use this analogy. We said that if you have a lake near your home and one day you see a fish floating belly up dead, it makes sense to examine that fish and see what it died from. What did that single fish die from? But should you one morning see half the fish in the lake floating belly up dead, what is it time to do? And people are very quick to understand it's time to look at the lake. And so we say, we use that fish in the lake analogy to describe that concept, and we did it successfully. And then it became clear that it wasn't sufficient, that it took us just so far into understanding. And that's how the groundwater was birthed. And Dina can talk about that.
Dina, you're muted. Okay.
Yeah, so the groundwater is a sort of metaphor, and it's a framework that was initially designed by one of our trainers, Bay Love, and some other colleagues in Texas as he was interning there and working with the Center for the Elimination of Disproportionality and Disparity, and building on this sort of water theme of ours, and helping people to see, how we can understand race and racism from an individual and an institutional perspective. And we know that it's even deeper than that. And so this was a really helpful, framework for people to think about. And so the groundwater approach is that, so they're individuals, and individuals have certain behaviors, and those behaviors are oftentimes, as we're talking about race, the byproduct of this racial system. So we can't even isolate individual behavior or familial, situations to explain. I was looking at a study on oral health about why we have racial disparities in oral health. And one of the studies was looking at, well, is this familial, or is it family-based, or is it structural? But when you looked at the family-based stuff, it's because the structural stuff. And so it take it right back to the groundwater.
That's right.
And yeah, so we needed to have, or it was really useful to have this groundwater approach to say that it's not enough to fix a lake. You can't fix a lake because of the interconnectedness and the contact that lakes have with each other. As in healthcare, they talk about social determinants of health. What are all of the things in your natural and your built environments from the time you are born to the time that you die that impact every aspect of your life? And every single one of those, from housing, education, the environment, transportation, labor and employment, banking and lending and finance, everything has been shaped by race in this society. So if we don't address the groundwater, then the lakes will, work to get back to the condition that they were in prior to the policy change. Or the, Brown versus Board of Education is always a good example of that. The Supreme Court says that we must desegregate schools. And the groundwater, the culture, the ideology, the orientations were so powerful and so strong that even the highest authority in the land couldn't mandate that, couldn't make that happen. And so we will recreate that through other means when it's in the groundwater. And it's simple and it's complex. And yes. I think, one of our colleagues says that we have such a lack of respect for race in this country that we have so simplified and minimized it that we think we can have a conversation at a church and heal racially, that we can have a conversation, a summit, we can have a series of discussions around race. and eliminate it, or for it not to be a problem again. And so, so the groundwater is a way to say, this is in the DNA, this is in the soil, this is in the foundation of this country.
So I like that. So let's build on it. So you say groundwater, right? Let's think about the groundwater implications then, COVID-19. I know people are chomping at the bit because here we are. I mean, the world's been devastated by COVID-19, but clearly in the United States, every day now there is some new assessment, some new understanding, from unemployment to who's being impacted, the hospitalizations, who's dying. So I need you and Suzanne to connect this groundwater analysis to what we've seen happen as a result of COVID-19 and our inability to even be able to understand and to talk articulately about COVID-19 in terms of its racial implications.
Wait, excuse me, do I start?
Either, jump on it.
Sure.
It's so critical that we understand our systems are in place before things happen. We have set up systems and structures in this country to disproportionately advantage white people, period. That will occur unless you are intentionally working against that, unless you are making race central to what you are doing, an understanding of how that plays out. Otherwise, the system will do what it was designed to do. And that benefits people who are white, who have come to be called white. So this is one glaring spotlight on disparities that were already here, on injustice that was already here. And it is my prayer that we're going to be able to see it with this light on it.
Dina?
Yeah, I mean, Suzanne just said it. When the system is already in place, then the manifestation of that is a given. It was the same thing with the predatory lending or subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. When we start outsourcing jobs, who's going to be the hardest hit? So when it's already in the system, then it's just going to play out that way. And so as we're thinking about COVID-19, because it is embedded in so many systems, that the disparities are in testing, the disparities are in diagnosis, the disparities are in deaths, the disparities are in the payroll protection program. Every aspect, the recovery, all of that, people of color are going to be impacted by that. So, when you have race-based outcomes, if an analysis of race isn't part of what you do, the inequities in the financial systems guaranteed that it was going to turn out the way that it did. So, Monica, you and I were on a call yesterday, a discussion yesterday, when someone says, when am I going to stop being surprised that this is the outcome? Right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's law enforcement in the African American community or it's a health crisis, when are we going to stop being surprised that this is the outcome?
So Suzanne, you've often been quoted as talking about that a lot of this work also is about building a base of power to challenge power. So I'd like to hear both you and Dina just kind of articulate that and make it clear for folks. So we're building a base of power to challenge power.
Well, I'm not sure I'm the first to say that. I think that's been said in our work for many years, but that's what organizing is bringing people together and building a base until you have sufficient size to be powerful, to have impact. We find people often in our work and organizations even with whom we've worked over the years say things like, well, we're going to hold them accountable as they pound the table and scream. Well, how are you going to do that? What leverage do you have to hold anybody accountable? What is the plan here? And if you have not built a base that can do that, then you're just talking. It's just talk. It's just a challenge. And so what we advocate, of course, is build that base. Do your organizing. And we've said in all my memory, and I'm sure a long time even before mine, that the work is that organizing. It is pulling people together. It is building that base.
You know, before you answer, can I attach on to that, that there are many naysayers that don't believe that this is work that we can do inside of our institutions. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about that in light of this whole notion, if we're going to build a base of power, what may be actually the pressing urgency of really dealing with our institutions.
Yeah, that, you know, that, you know, what Suzanne said, she's the first person I heard say it, so I'm giving her credit for that. But that is such a powerful position. That is such a powerful statement, building a base of power sufficient to challenge the existing power. You know, Parker Palmer in his paper, Divided No More, around educational reform, says that our old way of organizing pits fragile images of change against entrenched institutional power. And we do that all the time. And this was the hardest concept in the undoing racism and racial equity training. This was the hardest concept for trainers and for participants to grasp, because we just don't know what that means. We take, again, organizing so lightly that we can't understand what it is that we need to do with that kind of information. And so movement-minded people know, as an organizer, and I'm an organizer by, you know, by divine intervention. It's not anything I ever saw myself doing, but it is the most fulfilling title, work, you know, the thing that I do in my life, because I know it is the work. It's not, you know, the books that I've read. It is being able to understand how that applies to the problems that we're facing. And so, so when we're thinking about, you know, organizing is not just me and my outspokenness, you know, out there in the world. We have a saying at REI, well, actually it's Dr. Phil's saying, but it's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And so, so many people want to be right. And when you want to be right, you know, you can go and say what's on your mind, but that's it. You know, you can just go out there and tell people off, but that's it. And so organizing requires some patience. And so this thing about how we do that inside of a system or an institution. So, you know, I can think about it more clearly in my neighborhood, you know, getting people together to take on, you know, something that might be happening in the neighborhood. But how do I work as an organizer in ways that transform systems? And so that is a more artful kind of organizing. And so the Racial Equity Institute, that was another one of the reasons that we, you know, just came into existence, was to translate community organizing approaches inside of these complex hierarchical systems and institutions.
Well, now I want to use one of your quotes, and I'd like you to lift this up so that people can begin to see it in the framework of organizing. You often say that organizing is a way of life, or an understanding this through a racial equity lens is a way of life. So I'd like you, if you will, to talk about that, and particularly because of what I know personally, I'd like you to talk about it in that neighborhood frame. What does that mean to the collective of our neighborhoods across this country, and particularly poor neighborhoods of color?
Yeah, well, I was and am in some ways like a lot of people. You know, we just talk about how disappointed we are and how things have changed, and what, as a community, as a collective, as Black people, you know, we don't do this and we don't do that. And it's just like, well, then let's start doing it. And I was, you know, as I have, you know, lamented and struggled with, you know, what do we do? You know, how do we pull our community together? I was talking to someone last night, and it's like, why aren't we responding? Why aren't we addressing some things? And it's like, because we have to organize ourselves. And so one of the things that I think was so near and dear to me was, I was in awe when I learned about, you know, I thought we just did the best that we could where we were. I didn't know about, you know, Ransom Place in Indianapolis. I didn't know about Hayti in Durham. I didn't know about Collier Heights in Atlanta. I didn't know that Black people, you know, in Wilmington, North Carolina, and in Portland, Oregon, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know, pull themselves to the center and build communities where they could thrive in all the ways that they could in very oppressive environments. And it's like, we have so much more today because of what they did than we had then. Why haven't we done that? Where's our grocery store? You know, where's our neighborhood? Where's our block? Where is all of that stuff? And instead of talking about why we don't have it, let's just get about doing it. So, you know, my husband and I moved from Northwest Greensboro to Southeast Greensboro. You know, parents had some concerns, you know, because they worked to move us back that way. And here we are going backwards in their eyes. But, you know, we can't want to rebuild a community we don't want to be in, you know, and how do we do that safely? How do we do that, you know, in a way that is going to, you know, manifest something really tangible and concrete. So we moved to Southeast Greensboro, and we bought our house, and we didn't have a lot of resources, and we didn't have great credit and all that stuff, but slowly but surely started to secure property on our block. We started to buy back the block or rebuild the Black community before these really cool campaigns started in the last couple of years. And so, so this analysis really led to my husband and I rebuilding our neighborhood. And so we live on a street where, you know, I live one house over from my best friend. I live across the street from my son, who's closing on his house that we bought and rebuilt. He's closing next week. Down the street, we have some young African-American men who are working with REI. I mean, this is who you are and how you live your life. It's just not what you get up and say at a city council meeting or a school board meeting. This is what you do. So it is life-changing.
So because I know that we're gonna, and Suzanne, am I cutting you off? Is there something you
No, no.
So in that, I know that we're going to be trying to end at 2:45. I see a ton of questions. So Wanda, if I can invite you back in, you can open up your video, and I see a ton of questions. And so I'm going to let you kind of pick and choose. I'm eyeing a few of them, but I'd really like to make this very engaging for the folks who've taken time out of their schedules today to join us.
Absolutely. So I'll share a question that I received in an email when I sent this out. As a freelance coach facilitator who works with families, teachers, and helping professionals in early education, what are the top 3 action items that I can bring to the table when leading all staff symposiums and writing on my blog? I want to be an attuned co-conspirator, and she references Dr. Bettina Love's work being a co-conspirator versus an ally. The top 3 actions that she can take.
One, I think it's really important to get the information about the thing we're advocating. You know, we often take steps without adequate information. We have to figure out what are the questions that I need to ask. One of my colleagues here, you know, when we were talking about, you know, COVID-19, well, using the groundwater or racial equity or anti-racism framework, what's the information you need about that thing you're advising people on? Because how can you design, you know, or coach or encourage people to take steps on things that you don't have adequate information about? And so we have to practice this. You know, we step out there and then, you know, find ourselves not knowing what to do because we step out so early thinking, I've got some information. That information should lead us through a process that we often ignore. And so we tell people to slow your roll. I mean, that doesn't mean don't do anything. It does mean we have to ask ourselves some critical questions, because when we internalize the analysis, when we understand the depth of the analysis, we're not asking what to do. We're trying to figure out what we can take on in our lifetime, you know?
Wanda, can I jump in with one question that's real interesting to me? We have a judge here in Greensboro who's watching today, and they are asking the question, what can judicial officials do to address both the structural and institutional racism here in Guilford County? So I certainly wanted to get that question in.
Yeah, well, we had, some work has been done here before.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges that we have is that there's no institutional memory of what's been done. So we start over again. So back in 2003, 2004, 2005, we were working very closely with the courts, particularly around child welfare. All of the decision-making that was happening around removing children from homes, terminating parental rights, deciding who was going to go to a group home, or all of the things that, happen when our courts and our systems, education and child welfare are involved. So one, asking ourselves, has anything been done here? And then why? Monica, you and I brought Judge Lou Trosh. He's a white male judge from Charlotte, Mecklenburg judicial system, real leader in implicit bias and racial equity work. And we brought him here to talk to some Black judges. So what's going on when you have to bring a white male judge from another county to come and talk to an unprecedented panel of Black judges here about race, and that doesn't go anywhere? So someone has got to step up and be a leader. It's okay if you don't know what to do, but you have to decide you want to do something.
Suzanne, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I just want to add that it was juvenile court judges in Charlotte who started Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, and they have been the ones to not only start that organization, but they've been leaders in the work out of Charlotte, and that's important. They started out to learn, why do we have these outcomes? What is it we need to know? What don't we know? And it's very impressive when people do that. They want to know.
Wanda, next question.
Here's another question around all the events that are going on now. How can we build on the momentum of horrific events like those of this week and ignite national action while everyone is paying attention and looking? Can your Greensboro focused work be expanded nationally through these virtual platforms while everyone is stuck at home?
Yeah, I think, again, these incidents are, these tragic, horrific incidents are these deaths, these murders are the byproduct, again, of something much larger than what's going on. And, we're in reactionary mode, and it's so understandable that we're enraged and just pained by what is happening. We also have to figure out what is going on. I mean, really, what is going on with this? I don't think any of us believe, because some of our friends are in law enforcement, our family members are in law enforcement, and most of us don't believe that, people who are in law enforcement have it out for Black people. But there's something going on that we haven't uncovered. And it's because we go from this pathological pendulum swing dealing with these incidents. And so I do think that we need to figure out what is happening. I was reading the race riots of Chicago last night. And if you read the opening of the report that was written in 1919, 101 years ago, we should be appalled at the analysis that they had then that we're dealing with right here, right now, because we've never addressed the groundwater of this problem. And so, they were just talking about the death of a young Black man who floated into the white side of the water of the lake and was murdered. And the mayor is saying that the Black people and white people are here to stay, and we've got to figure this out, and something's going on, and we've got to get to the bottom of this in 1919. And here we are in 2020 having the same conversation. So we have to elevate this conversation to say something's going on, and we have to figure out what that is.
Another question is, where should we look to find existing equity organizers in a new community? What resources can help guide young organizers?
Suzanne?
I am not sure how to answer that. We tell people often that there are people in your community doing this work, and I promise everyone there are. And you've got to find them. I'm not sure you're going to get them through Google or the Yellow Pages, however. And I think you've got to look. You've got to be in touch with people who are thinking in new and different ways. And you will find what's going on if your eyes are open. We don't have a list for you.
Another question was about the base. You discussed community organizing, but what does the base actually do? And someone says, what is the best way to build a base?
Yeah, well, there's so much advice about how to do this. We just have to follow it. You know, the information's been out there for a long time. Building a base of power, identifying like-minded people. That group of people then agreeing to working on having a shared analysis with similar language. What are the opportunities that we have every day to, you know, sometimes we get information and we want to be the ones to tell it by ourselves, instead of saying this information needs to be shared and translated, and a strategy needs to be applied to this information. And so we talk about this. We call people, you know, organizers inside of our systems and institutions, you know, people that are gatekeep or power brokers. And we say that that people who collective power is what has changed systems and institutions in this country, not people who sit in charge. And most of us think, well, until white people change or until the person in charge changes, nothing can change. Well, that's just, Suzanne often says we have a fragile memory of change in this country, because that's not how things have happened. Things have happened because of collective clarity of people who understand, one, they're not the problem, and have effective approaches to what the problem is. So we have to go back and revisit some of those approaches. So we work together to say, okay, what is the language? What does it mean to have an analysis? How do we have these shared measurements? How do we get the kind of information that we need? You know, how do we talk about how can we convey inequity to people who don't share our politics or our analogies or our preferences? How do we convey that to people effectively? And we just have we've been pretty ineffective at that, you know, as community-based people. We've been it's the area where we can work on.
Wanda, I want to jump in here and also add to previous question, because this whole issue of young organizers has been kind of a sore spot in this community and in other communities, because I'll remind Dina as well as refresh Suzanne that we do have a young crop of young people who are trying to be politically active, who see themselves as organizing. But also I want to bring up what makes that a sore spot, because a lot of there has been seemingly a growing rift, or had been in particular, between their ideas about what they are doing and how they're doing it, and a kind of almost, I don't want to say competition, but a concern that somehow they see the older organizers, folks who've been around and folks who've been in this community, from public officials to older activists. There's been the dynamic that I've heard, or the word that I've used, is that, you know, the old organizers engage in respectability politics, and we don't do that. So I do want, while we've got a captive audience, to kind of address that. What does that mean? What does it mean to have a crop of young people coming along who legitimately want to do this work, and a crop of folks who've been doing the work that can't seem to meet in some common space?
Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Suzanne, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we have a wonderful friend and colleague who would remind us that this is developmental. And we have, I have had to spend some time remembering my early days as well, and how incredibly ignorant older people were at that time. And it is developmental. And I think that one of the things that occurs is a challenge of what has gone before. As I find my way, I might first challenge yours. I do find that we have come upon a time where there's more tension to be dealt with. And I want Dina to speak to that, because she has been in the middle of that in powerful ways. So that when it gets beyond how we develop as people and trainers and anti-racist human beings, and we cease to be able to see anything that comes before. And we spend time, in fact, tearing down what has been previously built. Then what's going on? What is it we need to do to address that?
Gina?
Yeah, it is developmental, and I think we've learned a lot. How to, sometimes step back and let people take the approach that they want to take. We can't be unraveled in the process. It's just like you can go and take whatever action you feel like you need to take, but we're not going to be disorganized in the process. So we have to be aligned and strong enough, which I think the Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance and I know Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, and I know Organizing Against Racism in Asheville and area, the Alamance for Racial Equity Alliance, and or in Durham and Raleigh, we've weathered those changes, we've weathered those dynamics, and I think we learned a lot from that. And I think what that is that people are they fight where they're at, and they we have to stand back and let people take their approach, and to be open to say, you are welcome to come and think with us and help us, and we're open to new approaches if we need to, but we're not going to be hijacked. We're not going to be disorganizing each other. And so I think I think we've weathered some of those challenges, and we'll continue to learn from that. But our focus is that we have to stay intact and stay together in order to get through some of those difficulties.
Go ahead, Wanda.
So there's one question that many participants may have. It says, my team is interested in participating and learning more about what we can do in our community and state. Will REI training opportunities continue in the COVID-19 environment when large gatherings indoors are not possible? What will this look like?
Yeah, well, we're already offering virtual, learning opportunities through our Groundwaters and our Groundwater Plus, which are groundwaters that include system-specific information. And so we'll have additional, virtual and online learning content that's coming. And we're thinking about, our phase 1 workshop and what that looks like. It's not so easy just to transfer in-person things to this sort of virtual platform. We have very specific reasons for arranging our workshops the way that we arrange them, having them in a circle, having people without their devices, having, the number of people that we have, so that we can get the information delivered in the way that we need to, and that people have an opportunity to be able to dialogue with each other. So we're working that out, but there are things that are available right now.
One, I'm going to jump in with a question. I also feel warrants at least a little bit of for Suzanne and Dina to respond to with some enlightenment. And that is we had 2 of our Latino colleagues on just a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Raul Quinones Rosado and Maria Renat Pumarejo. And our work is growing also in Latinx communities. But in spite of that growth, the reality is that there's still a lot of, misunderstanding of our connectedness in this struggle against oppression and this struggle against racism. So I'm just wondering, for any of our participants that are on who are part of the Latinx community, just how you see this issue of race, because often we're pitted against each other, and we sometimes see our struggles and our issues as competitive. So any light you guys want to shed on that, we would offer, or rather request that you do so.
I'll just say one thing that's, I think, really important, that I believe to be important, is we're set up for that to happen. We are set up to pit people of color against one another, to have that ethnocentrism and anti-Black bias, because it benefits white people. And so that is very difficult, but I know that Dina can speak to it on behalf of her community, which I, of course, will not do.
Again, it's the analysis from the education that I received in the anti-racism workshops has been just rich. And I think about it, makes me think and question things at a level that I just had not been, wired to do. And so when I think about the questions that we hear in the conversations about race, particularly from other people, like, where am I? And everything isn't about black and white. So how do we answer those questions? I mean, really, we just have we answer them because we have predetermined responses to things. So we just answer with whatever limited information we have available. But how do we, just stop and think about that? So where is everybody? And why is it that this comes up when we're talking about race? And so I have some continuums and some frameworks that, I've started putting together as I've struggled to answer this question. And I think it's an incredible organizing opportunity to say, you're right, this isn't about black and white. So where have you been? And where do you want to be in this? The question to ask, or to ask that question here, I think triggers us to say, why is that question not being answered? Or where are you in this sort of race organizing? Where are you in this world of racial inequity and racial injustice? Where are you? Because we'd love to have you. And so how do we then begin to put that analysis out there and then build relationships based on that? Because I think people are left with that. And I think it's, I don't think we do it justice in our everyday conversations about anti-Black bias, and that we haven't even sorted through our own internalized racial inferiority. We had an incident here in Guilford County where a very prominent family son that was confronted and dealt with by our local law enforcement. And it's just like, yeah, that's been happening here for a while. So part of that is that when we think that this only happens on one side of town to people who probably are up to no good or doing something, then we set ourselves up to be caught off guard by this, and it can put our lives in danger, and has, and does.
And does.
So I wonder, are there any last questions that I've overlooked? I'm trying to, we have at least 5 minutes before we shut down. So any others?
Well, this one might help many people. One of our participants said, I am a 65-year-old conservative Christian male who is appalled by the way racism has played out in society throughout the entirety of my life. I've read White Fragility and Between the World and Me. What is my next step in combating the evil force of racism?
I think that's for you, Susie.
I think so. I'm the white person. I get the white question. Wow. I'm first of all pleased and proud that you're at that place to be asking that question. I would consider, of course, coming to a training when trainings are available. That's not at this moment, but you can sign up for Groundwaters and other learning opportunities. Beyond that, I would say join the White Caucus in your area. Did he say where he was from, Wanda? I didn't hear. But if there is a caucus in your area, if you're in this area, there is indeed one. Join them, where you have the opportunity to explore white culture and what it means, what your whiteness means. White is operative in the world. It's operative. And we don't know it as white people. So that learning is a great gift and opportunity for us.
Are there other questions, Wanda? We still have a few minutes. And
one is about about the events from this week too. Can you talk about maintaining optimism in the face of reality? How do you manage staying in this over decades? What sustains you?
Well, I tell people all the time, I am so grateful for the sacrifices that people made before us, that we get to do the work, even though this environment is brutal and things are painful and tragic, that they created an opportunity for us to do the work in this environment. And if people had to figure out how they were going to confront slavery and how they were going to end Jim Crow. You know, like I said, when I was reading the report from the 1919 race riots in Chicago, I'm like, what was it like? Even though they had 6 Black men and 6 white men on the panel, you know, what was it like when Black men were still being lynched? And that was, you know, 40 years before Emmett Till. And so, you know, people are, you know, while they're on this panel, their lives were still in danger. And so, I just get strength from, you know, everything that, all the brutal terror that they were confronted with, to say, I can figure out how to do this. I'm not going to do this by myself, but I'm going to figure out how to do this, because I do think that we all want to leave this world in a better place than we found it. And so that's how I sustain. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say is that when we know that this is going on, then we're not caught off guard when it shows up. You know, these incidents are not isolated. These incidents are the byproduct of a pre-existing system. And when you know that that's there, then you're not, shocked, or, doesn't mean that you're not hurt or enraged, but you know that this could happen any minute. And that you've got to be doing some work that is going to work towards that not happening again.
So Dina and Suzanne, I want to personally thank you, and I really want to thank folks who took time out of their schedules to join us to hear and to experience at least some understanding of this work, why it is positioned the way it is, why we do what we do, and how important it is to us. I'd like the two of you, if you have any closing comment you want to offer, to do so now.
Suzanne?
If we go back for a moment to optimism and hope and belief, I love a quote by Tony Kushner, author and playwright, in which he says that hope is at home in the darkness. That hope isn't always feeling up and wonderful and on top of it. Hope is at home in the darkness. We will face these times. Sometimes when things are bad, I remind myself of those, as Dina well said, who came before us, and how disrespectful it is not to be hopeful. As I say, forgive us when we don't have hope, for you gave so much for us to be this far.
Thank you, Suzanne. Dina?
Yeah, well, that should have been the closing comment. I am so grateful. They say many are called, but few are chosen. And, Monica, you know me, and I don't believe leaders should self-select. I think leaders are chosen by people who believe in a message that they want to follow, and that there's some accountability there. And so I am someone who is in love with this framework and this analysis and the organizing, because I know it is how we're going to move this whole nation forward. And so I'm grateful for the people who have so brilliantly made information available to us so that we can do this work.
So I want to thank both of you for your time, for that you've given to us with the wisdom that you have extended. I want to invite all of our listeners out there to tune in this time next Thursday, where our guest will be the Campaign for Equity in New Orleans. We're going to have 6 panelists who have been doing some phenomenal organizing in the city of New Orleans. I want to thank one of them in particular, Sean Barney, who is actually the inspiration for us starting this particular virtual series. So we owe that to Sean, inspiration that was given from him. But we'll be here next week, June 4th, Thursday at 1:30, and we are hopeful that you'll be here too. So thanks so very much. Take care and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Black Pearls.